Good evening. I'm Judah Siegel, the chairman of the Jewish Community Relations Council here in the Raleigh-Cary area. So thank you very much for joining us. The Jewish Community Relations Council has sponsored 5 election events over the last month or so, and tonight represents the final event. By the way, if you want to see any of the previous ones, or if you'd like to share tonight's event with your friends, you're welcome to go to the Jewish Federation website, shalomraleigh.org, with a /JCRC. And there you will see recordings for all of our events. And I encourage you to take a look at the interviews that we've had with candidates over the last month. Now, our special interviewer, and we were so fortunate that Jonah Kaplan is part of our Jewish Community Relations Council. And of course, as you know, he's the political reporter for ABC 11. And tonight he will interview Governor Roy Cooper. So with that said, I'm going to step away. And Jonah, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it on to you to interview our governor.
Wonderful. Judah, thank you so much. And thank you for all of us for joining us. And for those of you who have been part of our great series here, getting to know the candidates, getting to know the issues, and having the opportunity to speak with some of our officials about issues that may not come up in debate, that may not come up in the everyday news cycle. But it is really an honor to welcome the 75th governor of the state of North Carolina, Governor Roy Cooper. Governor, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you, Jonah.
I've been talking to you on the phone, so it's like a little different to actually see your face.
Or sticking the long-handled microphone in my face.
That's true. Governor, my first question, by the way, are you familiar with the term beshert, the Yiddish term?
Not, sorry.
Okay, so it means meant to be. And I say that because this week marks the 2-year anniversary of the Tree of Life shooting. And it was 2 years ago that I remember, yes, you and I had, crossed paths a couple times, but it was when you spoke at Beth Meyer Synagogue at a vigil honoring the lives of those lost at the Tree of Life shooting. And I went up to you at a professional, one official event, and I just said, Governor, you spoke really beautifully. And you had then, I guess, told your communications director and my friend Sadie Weiner the compliment, and I remember freaking out. I said, the governor knows me by name? Cool. And, I just have to say, it's been wonderful working with you, and I appreciate, the transparency that you've given the press and, your willingness to always answer questions. And you and I have had some great conversations, so I'm excited about this one.
Well, thanks. At that night at Beth Meyer, I saw a lot of shock and sadness, but I also saw determination of people who are not going to let terror control their lives, and people who are determined to continue with prayer and continue to do the things they need to do to move forward. So thank you for being there that night. I got a lot of strong feelings from people who were there who believe that this struck at the very heart of our country, and that we have to do a lot to fight against hate and bigotry, which is very much alive, not only in this country, but throughout the world. We've got a lot of work to do.
Let me ask you this question. Some people I can already see this is going to be, oh, Jonah, you started with a softball, but I just wonder, how are you? I don't think that's a softball. You came into this office on the heels of HB2, which, for anyone who's been to a Seder, and we want to talk about the first Passover Seder ever at the governor's mansion, would say, Dayenu, would have been enough. HB2 would have been enough. Hurricane Florence would have been enough. Racial strife would have been enough. Then the pandemic. How are you? How are you holding up?
Don't forget the first earthquake in 100 years.
In Sparta, North Carolina. That's right.
Look, I've got a great place to live. I've got plenty of food. I've got people around me who care. There's so many North Carolinians right now living on the edge. I'm doing fantastic. And I think I have recruited the best, most qualified, diverse cabinet and staff in the history of our state. I've told Jim Hunt before, he's the greatest governor that ever has and ever will be in North Carolina. But I think I've recruited the very best cabinet and staff, and I'm grateful for their work every single day. I'm doing fine. The family's fine. We're deeply saddened by the loss of our dog, Ben, this past week. Those of you who own pets and know about pets realize how difficult that can be. And if you're interested in our pets, we have a Facebook page called First Pets of North Carolina that tells you about our cats, and you'll see a lot of history of Ben, but we will really miss him, and that's a real gut punch when you lose a dog like that. It's hard to even talk about. But
well, we hope that the pup who brought you a lot of joy, that his memory is for a blessing for you guys. And we hope that maybe someday, if you are given the chance to be in the governor's mansion again, maybe you'll welcome a new dog to the governor's mansion on Blunt Street. I want to ask you, Governor, because a lot of us obviously have been watching you give those briefings, and before the coronavirus pandemic, certainly with any severe weather, but specifically in the pandemic. Let's dig in. Can you talk to us about what happens before you go on the podium? What are those discussions like when you're trying to put together these executive orders? Who are you talking to, and what are the discussions like? And where are you doing those discussions? Are you in the office? Are you at home? Is this late at night? What's going on?
You know things have gotten tough when you're up at midnight, propped up on a pillow in your bed, reading epidemiology studies. A lot goes into those briefings, work by hundreds of people. I speak frequently with my upper level senior staff, along with Dr. Cohen and Mike Sprayberry, the staff, Susan Perry, Dr. Tilson, Cody Kensley. We get all of the information, assemble it, talk about it. We get points of view from people who are out in the fields, and we make decisions about putting the health and safety of North Carolinians first. But either I'm here at the governor's mansion on Zoom or on the phone, or I am at the Emergency Operations Center. I'm in both of those places frequently, and we sometimes are sitting around a socially distant table with masks, or we're just on a Zoom call. But we get a lot of work done, and I think we've all figured out we don't need quite as many meetings as we thought we needed before this pandemic started, that's for sure.
Well, some of your meetings, I can imagine, have they been heated? I mean, what kind? I imagine the robust discussions. Share with us what you're willing to about some of those when we were going through the phases, when we're talking about schools. I'm sure you feel the pressure of the outside noise.
Oh, we most certainly do, and we listen to that, and we know that we have to strike a balance. But I really think that this so-called battle between health and the economy really isn't a battle at all. I believe firmly that they go hand in hand, and that our economy gets significantly better when we slow the spread of this virus. And the steps that we take to do that makes our economy significantly better. And if we get everybody rowing in the same direction, if people, and I'm hoping after Election Day, when a mask isn't equivalent to a campaign button and the issue is removed from the political sphere, that more and more people can understand that we are in this thing together, and that if we take the steps that we know we can do that don't cost us anything, that wear a mask, social distance, do those things, that the economy is going to get better. So really in our discussions, we know health and safety is the prime directive, so that the discussions aren't heated, but they are passionate, and they are, when we see our numbers go up, when we know that people are getting sick, when we know that there are outbreaks, there is deep concern, and what can we do to try to stem the tide of this virus, and how's the best way to approach it? And we're constantly getting new information. We really are navigating uncharted waters, unless you want to count pandemics decades ago. And with the new technology that we have now, we know so much more. We're learning from other states. we try to learn as we go and apply what we learn to the next steps that we take.
When talking about the pandemic, I know one of the biggest issues, certainly a lot of the discussion was about bars and entertainment first, but now it's about schools. And this morning, we know a number of Wake County students went back to school. This is a question I actually asked you at a news conference a couple weeks ago. And before I say it, people have been saying, oh, the schools issue. I want to make clear, you've given permission for schools to open. It's not like you're saying schools closed. People want their school to open, call your school board. They're the ones that are making the decisions. But at what point do you, do you have to, I guess, it's one thing to say you're welcome to open, it's up to you. But at what point do you say, listen, it's time to open?
Well, we've been a little more prescriptive than that, Jonah. Our prime objective here, our number one priority and the number one opening we want to have is to get our children safely back in school. We know the negative things that are happening when they aren't there. We've got children who are learning remotely. We have children who are learning part remotely and partly in person. And then we have children K through 5 who are all in person now, but every one of them have mask requirements and safety requirements. And I'm so proud of our educators across the state. That's the number one thing that we want to do. And yes, we've given communities choices, but safety is always the number one priority. And we want people to look at what's happening in their local area with their numbers, with their percent positive, with their number of cases, with their outbreaks, and how they can handle it, looking at their school facilities. One of the things this pandemic has done is shining a light on challenges we already face, and it's shining a light on our school infrastructure. We need that school public building bond badly. It's shining a light on the lack of high-speed internet access in many areas of our state when we're dealing with remote learning and telemedicine. We've got a bond proposal for that. So there's a lot we need to do. But yes, we think education decisions like that do need to be made locally. But we have given them a number of options, and we hope to be expanding those options soon. When you mentioned bars and things like that, we know that entertainment or businesses that attract people together in one place, in tight places, indoors, those are the businesses that have been hurt worse by this pandemic, just simply because of the fact that they can be places where this virus is most easily spread. And that's where we've had to institute economic safeguards to try to slow the spread of the virus. Most of the businesses across North Carolina are open and working, we hope, safely, and encouraging employers to do the things they need to do to protect employees and customers. But really and truly, our economy overall is going to be tied with our success in slowing the spread of this virus. And if people can come together to help us do that, the sooner we can get our economy where we need it to be.
You're obviously not just the governor, you're a resident of North Carolina. All of these rules affect you. Tell us about how you've had to deal with this. You're obviously not campaigning like you were 4 years ago, but what about visiting your daughters? What about going to church? Tell us about how it's affected you personally. And are you going to houses of worship? Have you gone to visit maybe family back in Rocky Mount? Tell us about how it's affected you personally and what you and your family are doing.
Obviously, I'm not traveling as much as I have been, and I haven't been out of the state since this pandemic began. My daughters who live outside of the home, haven't hugged them, wear masks when they come around, they wear masks. We try to stay socially distant. That's really hard for a dad. I have been back home to Nash County and visited family there. The same there. One thing that we're finding about this pandemic is that more and more people are spreading the virus within the family. You go to the post office, you go to the grocery store, you go out, you wear the mask, you socially distant, but you begin to let your guard down with close friends and family who don't live with you. And we're seeing significant virus spread during that period of time. So I'm trying to lead by example and do the things that I know that's important to slow the spread of this virus. We have been ordering some takeout. I haven't been inside restaurants yet. I think it's safe to do so, particularly with the restaurants that.
You feel comfortable with endorsing any takeout restaurants tonight?
Let's stay away from that right now. Some of them know exactly who I am and know what my order is. So.
Okay. I'll see if I can use my off the record. I'll see if I can use my sources for that one.
I work to tip well because really and truly, everybody is struggling on the edge financially, and it's tough for them right now. So anybody who can afford to tip well, do that in those situations.
What about Thanksgiving? What will you be doing for Thanksgiving? Because you talk about family gatherings. Forget Halloween. That seems to be what could be a very probably the most challenging thing we've had yet. If there's a Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, Halloween, and then Thanksgiving.
It's exactly the kind of event that will cause significant spread of the virus. And I think this year is one of those years where it's a wise decision to stay with immediate family. I was listening to Dr. Francis Collins, who was telling me about the fact that his family does big Thanksgiving every year. It's their most important holiday. And they're calling it off this year because they know they're going to wait till next year. They know it's the right thing to do. We will just do immediate family this year.
So thinking ahead, what does the second term agenda look like? Is it status quo when it comes to the pandemic? Does it, if you're reelected and then in some ways, we know that if Dan Forest is elected, he's already said he's going to drop the mask mandate. I imagine you'll keep it, right? You'll keep it as long as necessary.
We will, and we will continue to put the health and safety of North Carolinians first and fighting this pandemic. We know that thousands of people have lost their lives, and many more can if we don't do something to stem the tide. I do believe that after this election, that more people will come together, and whoever gets elected this time, I think the thing that needs to be put at the first of the list is people who will be healers, people who will be elected to represent everybody, not just the people who voted for them, not just the people who supported them, but everybody. And to send that signal and actually do things to show that that's what you want to do. Our state will need healing. This country needs healing. And I am so hoping that will happen this time.
Speaking of healing, let's give a shout out to your Secretary of Health and Human Services, Dr. Mandy Cohen, certainly a gem and one of the shining lights of the Jewish community here in North Carolina. You have a number of members of our Jewish community working with you. We have, of course, Dr. Cohen, we also have Tracy Zimmerman, and my good friend, Sadie Weiner. Tell us about what's that like? What have you learned from them? And you are the governor, you hosted the first ever Passover Seder in the governor's mansion.
Well, I've been to a number of Passover Seders before, and we thought that it was a great idea to do the first ever one here in the governor's mansion. And, you asked me what I learned. The great thing about the Jewish members of my staff and cabinet, I've been very close for a long time with Josh Stein, who is the Attorney General. I appointed Justice Mark Davis, the first Jewish justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. But in talking with them, this sense of wanting to repair, this sense of wanting to make sure that we find a way forward, that we can help everybody as a community. Dr. Cohen, I talk with her daily and several times a day sometimes, and she clearly has the gift of knowing her community and wanting to add to that community, but she also has the gift of being not only intellectually brilliant, but an excellent communicator as well. And sometimes, a lot of times, those two don't mix, but with her, she has the ability to talk to people at any level. And that's certainly extraordinarily valuable. Sadie, obviously the same way with her skills in communication, but having this Seder here and making it small enough so that we hear the ancient stories and we think about how applicable they are today, with the plagues, the modern day plagues that we face, and how we can approach that with our faith and moving forward. I think it was a wonderful event, and it's something that we want to do again. Obviously, this year would not be the time, but we're hoping to be able to do that again soon. And, you know, you mentioned my faith. I'm very proud of my church. I'm a Presbyterian elder and received so much from my faith community. I've taught Sunday school for decades. Very proud of the effort that my church worked on for years, the three faiths, one God conversation with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and talking about the commonalities that we have and how we can respect each other and work together for the common good. I think that's so important. Diversity is a strength for us, and it's really problematic that we have politicians today who want to use that diversity for political purposes and taking advantage of the hatred and bigotry that is still there that we want to try to heal, but yet they're going to use that in order to create divisions, to create political advantages. And we don't need that now, particularly more than ever. We need people who value diversity, to see diversity as a strength and realize that the more different viewpoints we have, the better the end product will be. And I want my governorship to continue to be that way. I believe we've done that well in the first term. And in the second term, this healing will be a priority. Healthcare will be a priority. We don't know what this legislature is going to look like. And I'm working, campaigning not only for myself, but legislators across the state who believe in investing in education and healthcare and clean air and water, and who want to fight discrimination. Looking for those people and hoping that we can have a general assembly that reflects those values.
We could spend several hours talking about the legislature and your relationship with the Republican leadership of that legislature and General Assembly. But you did work together, at least you did come to agreement on, look, there has been some bipartisanship. And interestingly, some of those bipartisan things, although we get in the weeds a little bit because of that budget, and for people not in North Carolina or who don't follow state politics, there is a budget, there's not a budget, there's not really budget. Sounds like a Jackie Mason routine. But essentially, once there's going to be a budget, there was going to be agreements about Holocaust education. Tell us about your support for that and why and what resonated about that with you.
I'm strongly supportive, and you have to think about these kinds of bills because there's a lot on our teachers. There's a lot on our schools. There's so many hours in the day. So when you make a requirement, it has to be something that you know is critically important. And this legislation that requires teaching of the Holocaust in our school, I think is critical. You know, all of us have talked to Holocaust survivors. There are so few of them left now. Those personal stories can never really be replaced. But we talk about not wanting history to repeat itself, and you look at the world today, And you see, yeah, it can repeat itself. And we must teach our children about this horrific event in the history of our world and steps that we need to take to avoid it. I think there was in general agreement, because I do think that there is bipartisan support for the state of Israel in North Carolina. And I believe it is an issue that we have agreed on and have passed legislation in the past.
Well, and that's a good segue, because the second
something will get done and should get done.
right, but the second bill that did get done and is law, North Carolina became the 22nd state in the country to basically outlaw or to kind of say North Carolina is not going to do business with an entity, a company that boycotts Israel or boycotts Israeli companies. Why did you sign that bill, and what did that mean to you?
Well, the boycotts, divestments, and sanctions against the state of Israel, the anti-BDS bill that it is often called, I believe that was important because I wanted Israel to know that North Carolina stands with Israel and that we are very grateful for that relationship, and trying to undercut Israel's economy is something that we don't want. And so that was bipartisan legislation that I was able to sign, that many of the Jewish community were there with me when we did it. It was a wonderful day. It was in 2017, and still sends a strong message to this day, and an important one, I believe.
Secretary of Commerce, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Copeland, I know he and I have talked a little bit about some of the economic things and the partnerships. I mean, yes, Israel is a foreign policy, a federal government thing, but I don't know if you could talk about some of the partnerships economically, maybe agriculturally, biotechnology. What do we know about behind the scenes, the state of North Carolina and the state of Israel?
Well, we have a strong relationship. I met with the Consul General to the Southeast. We have attracted new jobs, over 1,200 jobs over the last few years, particularly in the manufacturing area, with companies from Israel coming to North Carolina. Our Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina has a liaison with Israel. We want to continue that working relationship, obviously continuing to grow jobs in North Carolina, but also create more trading between our state and Israel. I know that there's been a lot of frustration with the federal government and foreign countries, many of them economically, because of the state of the State Department and how a lot of it had been hollowed out, and a lot of the relationships that many countries around the world had made with the United States through the State Department. They've decided to come directly to the states and to the governors to talk about economics and trade. And so I'm talking with a number of countries, but Israel is certainly one of them, and an important trading partner, but also education, culturally, security, all of that is important in the relationship that we have.
And you've been there. You've taken a trip there. When was that? Tell us about it.
So it was in 2006. I had planned to go after that, but we were looking at a trip just as the pandemic had hit. So we're going to have to delay that for a while. But I was there with
maybe you'd allow a reporter to go with you. I'm just saying to document it all.
Maybe it's got to be a reporter lottery, and the loser gets to go. No, seriously. I went with the former Attorney General of New York, Bob Abrams, who has a daughter who's married to a rabbi in Jerusalem. It was one of the most, if not the most fascinating trips of my life. It was so important for me to be there. I think one of the most amazing experiences I had was being in a kibbutz and looking out over the mountains, and you could see a flag of Hezbollah flying within sight distance. And I thought about this is an oasis of freedom and democracy surrounded by a lot of terror and hate, surrounded by a lot of people too who want to make a better life for themselves, and we want to be more cooperative, but there are terrorists who are at their door all the time. And this is a thriving democracy that is economically an economic engine, people living wonderful lives in the middle of all of this. And I was amazed at how people did that and was very attracted to it. It was a wonderful, wonderful trip.
Well, I got to say, a lot of people can say the same about North Carolina, oasis of success, of economic powerhouse, good leadership. A lot of people in the South are looking to North Carolina, and I know we have a hard stop in a couple minutes. I
will say that I was planning to meet Ariel Sharon at the time, and that week he had his cerebral hemorrhage, and
wow.
when he obviously got very sick and never really recovered from it, so I was unable to meet him at the time. But anyway, we can spend some more time at some point talking about that trip, because
I would like that. Real quick though, just for a little brevity, you didn't meet Sharon, but I know you've met with President Trump. What are those meetings like?
I've had a lot of conversations with him, whether it be about hurricane relief or the pandemic or the Republican National Convention. Sometimes it's hard to get in a word edgewise because he likes to talk. In my conversations with him, always, North Carolina is first. I put North Carolina first to try to get what we need for our state and to protect our state if need be. And obviously I'm for Joe Biden. You talk about healers. I know we got a hard spot, but I'll just tell this story. I became friends with Beau Biden, who was then the Attorney General of Delaware. Of course, Joe Biden's son, who tragically died of brain cancer. And Beau and I became friends, and we were in Washington at one point, and Vice President Biden was then the vice president living in the vice president's home. And so Beau and I went out to visit his dad, and I spent some time with him. And there's a reason why so many people on both sides of the aisle talk about his genuineness as a human being and as a good person, and somebody who, even with very different political beliefs, he can reach out and have empathy for that person and can touch that person on a personal level. But he looked at me, he said, Roy, you know who my favorite vice president in history is? No. He said, Dan Quayle. I thought, why is he telling me Dan Quayle? He said, because Dan Quayle, you see that swimming pool out there? Dan Quayle had that built. And it is a grandchildren magnet. And I love Dan Quayle. He's the kind of person that I think can be a healer for this country and can actually represent all people. And that's why I'm supporting him. But I'm going to continue to communicate with the current president and do what I need to do to make sure that the people of North Carolina are protected.
Well, Governor, good luck with the rest of your campaign. Thank you so much for taking time with us. And I've told this to you before, yes, I'm a journalist, but I'm also a citizen of North Carolina. And I thank you for what you do on behalf of all of us, because it affects all of us. And we appreciate your service to our state.
Well, let me right back at you. I know journalism is particularly hard these days, and it is often chastised and complained about, often unfairly, but particularly now with the war against the media. I do believe that a free and open media is the foundation of our democracy, and that it must be protected, and you guys need to keep doing things so that people trust you and keep doing your jobs. But I know how hard it is, and grateful that you are in that field, and grateful for what you do as well, Jonah.
I appreciate that, Governor. I look forward to talking with you again. I'm sure I'll be asking a question of you soon.
As we close, let me just add my special thanks to you, Governor Cooper, on behalf of the Jewish Community Relations Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judah. I appreciate it very much.
And Jonah, stay with us, because as this interview ended, it reminds me of of course, we're finishing in a few minutes the fifth of our series over the last 2 months. We started in September. And I recall at our first one, Jonah, we turned the tables a little bit. I was interviewing you and your colleague, Michael Perchik, and my questions were all about voting and all the details to make sure that our listeners got exactly how to do it, how to vote early, how to vote absentee, how to vote on time, all those. And we spent a bit of time doing that, and I think people really got it. So my question to you, coming around full circle, Jonah, is you're out there in the world more than most of us. Many of us are working from home or trying to not run around so much, and your job is to run around and to see people and meet people. How do you think voting is going? Not just among the people who happen to listen to our first session, but around our community, around the state. What do you see?
Well, the numbers speak for themselves. It's doing fantastic. I think North Carolina, I mean, we now have, as of today, this morning, there were 3.1 million votes already cast. These are already sent back, accepted, in the tabulator. They've been counted. We don't know the results, but that's it. There's only 7.2 million registered voters. So we're getting towards almost 50% now. We'll definitely pass 50% by the end of the week. Maybe even get to 60% by the end of
really before voting day.
Oh yeah, before voting day, I suspect we'll be at 4 million votes counted and cast, which means on election night, as soon as the polls close at 7:30, by 9 o'clock, we might have 80% of the vote reporting. I mean, people were saying, "Oh, it's going to be so long," but everything's in. So it worked out very well.
In some states, they're not allowed to open the absentee ballots until election day.
Now, that's some states. Now, here in North Carolina, and this is interesting. You mentioned that because tomorrow is when Wake County Board of Elections and Durham County Board of Elections, if they've arrived, when they have these public meetings, by the way, you can watch them online, you can go, they will open up, they will first inspect the envelopes, if it has the witness signature, if it has the voter, all the information, it will be opened, then they'll inspect it, the ballot, put it in a pile, and at the end of that meeting, it'll be counted. They go through tens of thousands at each meeting. Last week, it's been going on for several weeks.
I see.
Okay. Oh yeah, they've been doing it. So I think I attended a Wake County meeting 2 weeks ago, and that day they did 23,000. 23,000 ballots.
Whoa. Okay. And the public can see the process.
They can see the process. Just go onto your county Board of Elections, search Wake County Board of Elections, Durham County Board of Elections, Chatham County Board of Elections, Orange County Board of Elections. They've got all the meeting schedule.
They're not reporting yet who's ahead.
No, they do not. So they tabulate them, and all of that information then goes onto a thumb drive. And that thumb drive is then locked away, and then locked away, and then locked away. There's 3 different, basically, protections, and they're never put online. So even the computers that they have where they tabulate everything, they're all in closed circuit, and no one will see them until the polls close on election night.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for the insight. Well, John, let me go back. One of your questions there, I'm segueing back to your conversation with the governor, was about his conversation with the president. You, if I'm not mistaken, have had a chance to interview both presidential candidates and to hear them on multiple occasions. Can you give us any sense of, and I'm going to narrow it here, to what you're hearing as it relates to the Jewish community. And I'll just say, I realize that those of us in the Jewish community have lots of different opinions, and we know that we're not monolithic in our views. But nevertheless, things that could be of interest to us. What are you hearing from each presidential candidate that might be worth knowing that we wouldn't know from?
Well, look, when it comes to Israel and the Jewish community, I mean, Israel was conspicuously absent from any debate. Now, realize we only had 2, not 3 presidential debates, but never came up in a presidential debate, didn't come up in a vice presidential debate. That's because it's not an issue. I mean, if Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were the candidates, I think you'd have a much different conversation. But it's very tough to call Joe Biden, and even Kamala Harris for that matter, to try to label them as anti-Israel, because both of them, and this includes Kamala Harris, speak at AIPAC. They were AIPAC supporters, not J Street, AIPAC. So Kamala Harris, who was named, one of the most progressive senators, but she spoke at AIPAC. And Joe Biden was one of the authors of the $38 billion memorandum of understanding, the $38 billion basically 10-year military aid deal between Israel and the United States. So I think the Trump administration and Trump supporters are certainly going to try and push a narrative that they're the most pro-Israel, that Biden would do that. And look, it is true that the president that Biden served under, Barack Obama, infamously talked about creating daylight between Israel and the United States, had a fractious relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But you'd be hard-pressed to find amongst all of those Democrats that were running for president a more pro-Israel candidate than Joe Biden. Now, having said that, everyone's going to have different opinions, and there's no question that the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, sovereignty of Golan Heights in Israeli territory, and recent peace deals between Israel and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates and now Sudan. Those are great headlines. Mm-hmm. But then there are many other Americans who say, well, you can't have a strong Israel without a strong America, and you can't have a strong America unless you get through this pandemic. And so there's a lot to weigh here. There's a lot to weigh here.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me, again, in terms of views and...
I want to say something about the governor, though, because the governor, we didn't really get to talk about this, but he accomplished something that very few politicians have, and that is he really thread a needle in terms of winning the vote in North Carolina. Because let's look back to 2016. North Carolina voted for Donald Trump, Republican. North Carolina voted for Richard Burr, a senator, Republican. North Carolina voted for Dan Forrest, a Republican, for lieutenant governor. But for governor, they elected a Democrat, Roy Cooper. How did he do that?
So
I don't have an answer, but
okay.
it's very interesting that he was able to thread the needle. And same with Josh Stein, the Attorney General, who's a Democrat.
Do you think that's because of his personality, his personal popularity, that people know him, or something? Or
there were a lot of Cooper Trump voters, and it will be interesting to see. Clearly, there were a lot of Cooper Trump voters. There were. It will be very interesting to see if there will be Cooper Trump voters again, because that's what carried him last time. We don't know what the support is going to be with the president, but Governor Cooper has held a comfortable lead in the polls. But the polls are worth whatever they are. But I mean for him to win the governorship in 2016, that was a major accomplishment for him, and a real study in how voter habits are totally changing. And how, when you look even now, registered Democrats, registered Republicans, registered unaffiliated, that's not a guarantee on any vote.
Let me broaden it a little bit. You were talking about the the particular interest in relation to Israel, about our presidential candidates, about our, I'm taking credit, you interviewed a number of people during this last couple of months, Lieutenant Governor Dan Forrest among them, Greer Martin, Tim Moore, David Price, really both Republicans and Democrats. Do you remember any outstanding things that relate to Jewish community or relate to Israel that you remember from these interviews and say, well, that's really either good or bad? Did anything strike you that is hitting your memory today?
Certainly, Dan Forrest spoke of a real love and connection for Israel, wants to build on the relationship between North Carolina and Israel, wants to build security ties between North Carolina and police, and would certainly be a fierce critic of any kind of anti-Semitism on the North Carolina college campuses, in Durham when the city council voted to basically suspend, even though there was no training between Durham police and Israel, but suspend training. Dan Forrest certainly, and he also, I would think, epitomized a lot of the Christian right, and that has been an interesting relationship for the state of Israel, and certainly for Zionist supporters. They have been friends, no doubt about it. The governor and the lieutenant governor, excuse me. Look, credit to both governors. They are credit to both candidates. Governor Cooper, Lieutenant Governor Forrest, remarkably consistent in where they are. So they really do provide voters with a clear choice. And that is to the voters' benefit. So, they've remained remarkably consistent, especially when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic and how they would do that. With the state, it was also just interesting, and I always find this when talking with state officials. We talked to Speaker of the House, Tim Moore, and to Representative Greer Martin. There's so much stock obviously put into the presidency and then the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. But so much of our life, much more of our life, is dependent on what goes on at the General Assembly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so when we're talking about money for public education, talking about money for transportation, our roads, our bridges, bus service, Department of Transportation, so much, highways that you like, new roadways, new exits. You want to see 440 expanded. You want to see 540. You don't want to see it. How do we get rid of traffic? Medicaid expansion.
That's easy. Have a pandemic where people don't go anywhere anymore.
Yeah.
Traffic is easy.
Right. But all and your taxes. All your fees. With a DMV, and I'm like, all that stuff is your local government and your state government. So these are very impressive individuals. They take their jobs very seriously, and I think it would behoove all of us to improve what I like to call our political literacy. And what struck me from Greer Martin, the Democratic representative from North Raleigh, is basically saying, a lot of voters are engaged, a lot more voters are engaged, but very few people are interested in becoming, running.
Mm-hmm.
And, people say, why can't we get better people? Why can't we get better people? Well, go ahead, run, step up to the plate. So that was interesting. And then what stuck out to me from Congressman David Price was the way he talked about, and I really, for people who didn't join us, you missed out, because it was a very frank conversation about the Iran nuclear deal, about the Squad, about progressive Democrats, about U.S. America. It was a very, very good, engaging, respectful conversation. And it was just a great back and forth. And so I would go reach out, rewatch that. And you can rewatch all of these because I think you'll learn a lot. But that one was really interesting. And I give Congressman Price a lot of credit because he and I have talked a lot. So we have a good relationship. But I came out with him some good questions. I came out with all of them with good questions. I don't, it's not I told Dan Forrest, it's not my job to be friends with you. I can be friendly, but it's not my job to be friends with you. He got a kick out of that. But these were good. These were really great opportunities. And so for those of you who would join us, thank you, because this was important. And for those who missed out,
The
they're lost.
recordings are there.
Yeah.
Jonah, let me ask you one more question. And this is broader than the interviews that you did for us here in the community, but really from a wide standpoint across the country. Were there? Can you pinpoint any candidates? This is in relation to Judaism, in relation to Israel, in relation to Jewish community, where you were surprised, where you were like, wow. It could be good or bad. Those where you were shocked, where you were awoken to something that they were saying that was important.
Well, look, it is very interesting to me that, everyone from state lawmaker, basically to all state, everyone's been to Israel. Almost everyone's been to Israel. Greer Martin hasn't, but he was very aware of it. And, Israel is a federal government thing, right? That is, Israel and Middle East policy. That's
Foreign policy.
Thing. But look how much is happening between Israel and the states, and that's credit to the state government here, and that's credit to the Israeli government, because they recognize that if you're going to engage the country, the United States is, federalism. It's states. And if you forge relationships with states, it's not just the American economy, but you appeal to all different kinds of people. It was very interesting learning about agriculture and biotechnology and seeing where there's such relationships and partnerships. It was the same thing when I learned when I was kind of volunteering with Israel Bonds, which, I never knew that many states and their pension. Now, North Carolina doesn't, maybe not yet, maybe they will, but a lot of states keep their pensions in Israel bonds as an investment. In fact, Major League Baseball has $20 to $30 million in Israel bonds. I didn't know that. I learned that a couple of years ago. So it's very interesting that a lot of things happen behind the scenes, and as much noise as there is from the squad, from these progressives, noise is noise. Facts on the ground. Look at the data, find out for yourself what's going on. You have to ignore the noise, and because what's actually happening versus your perception of what's happening is just very, very different.
Well, Jonah, you've been marvelous. That's an understatement. Really, because of your involvement with us here in the Jewish Community Relations Council, and of course because of your profession, working for ABC 11, you've really intertwined the two. You really lent to us your expertise, both reaching out to these candidates across the board, to interviewing them, and to helping us analyze what's behind it all. So we owe a great debt of gratitude to you. Tonight, this does conclude our 5 pre-election sessions.
I want to thank you, Judah, for facilitating this. I want to thank you for being wonderfully persistent in calling me when I was on the road to make sure I was on top of this. Thank you for taking this seriously, and thank you to all those who sent in questions. And I apologize tonight. We had a shortened time with the governor. We weren't able to get in questions. I see Hal Marcus on the line. Oh, he sent us a question. So I apologize, Hal. Wear your mask, I guess, is the answer that the governor will tell you. And I know we had another question about wearing masks at B'nai Mitzvah. I'm sorry we didn't get to all those tonight, but I tried to weave a lot of different things, the questions into the conversation, even if they weren't asked directly, but they were made in references indirectly.
And you did. And you did.
Yeah.
And so again, it's also thanks to your colleague, Michael Perchik, who is not with us tonight, but you invited him to help in the first session. And I look forward to other opportunities for us to work together on behalf of our Jewish community.
And go vote. Go vote. You have
Here
until
we
Sunday.
go. As we're closing up, I have to put on my mask because I'm engaged with other people. So there we go.
Yes.
And
So go vote. You have until Saturday for early voting in North Carolina. And in Wake County, the hours are 8 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. And then on Saturday, the last day is 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And that is the same at every Wake County location. There are 20 locations, same hours, 8 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday. Maybe don't go on Saturday. Go to Zoom in the shul instead. Whatever you want, that's fine.
but you could go on election day. That's a whole new idea.
And you can go on election day.
So Tuesday, the polls are open, and if I'm not mistaken, if there's a line, they won't close until everyone gets to vote. If you're there, you will get to vote. So I have a sign out in front of my house that says I voted early, and I encourage everyone, you can still do that.
Right.
Jonah, many thanks. Thanks to you and the Jewish community for watching and being with us. Good night.